Okay, for as odd as yesterday's kickoff car for Oddity Week was, today we're really plumbing the depths of the bizarre with this concept Le Mans prototype from the mind of Luigi Colani, who clearly had some better drugs than the rest of the car designing world in 1970. Mr. Colani, who was, despite his name, a German chap, made a name for himself as a wide-ranging industrial designer, specializing in a style he called biodynamic design. This school of thought focused on rounded forms and a generally organic design language, which Colani claimed was inspired by the fact that the planets are round, their orbits are round, and therefore everything should be round. Which I guess kind of makes sense, but not sure I'd go so far as to base my entire philosophy around it. Oh well. In addition to this fever dream, Mr. Colani designed numerous domestic objects, a sailboat, some ekranoplanes for the Soviets, and a raft of vehicles for a number of manufacturers, including Fiat, Alfa, Lancia, Volkswagen, and BMW, and shortly after designing this prototype, went on to design a concept Formula One car for Eifelland, which looked like this. Guy really didn't do the whole normal thing, did he? Anyway, in 1970, he had established a studio near Sassenberg in Germany and was looking for his next project. He looked at the Lamborghini Miura, which had been introduced a few years prior, and decided that it needed aesthetic improvement through the lens of biodynamicism. In typically artistic fashion, he didn't actually make use of his new studio to build this car, preferring instead to style and build it in his dining room, as we can see here. Naturally, this work involved cutting a Miura in half, doing away with the front end completely, and then designing a sofa with a windscreen to replace it. Retained was the transversely mounted 3.9-liter, 365-horsepower V12, assuming he used a Miura S, which was the contemporaneous model available, the 5-speed manual transmission, and the rear suspension componentry, but the rear was repackaged into essentially an engine pod separated from the seating and control area. Speaking of the controls, rather than the traditional wheel and pedal setup, the vehicle was controlled by joystick, as seen here, which does beg questions about the feasibility of using a manual transmission, but we'll leave it at that. It's not immediately evident whether this was just for steering, control, or throttle as well, or how gears would be changed, but it is a concept, so quite possibly it was going to be thought-controlled or something. The front wheels were also placed underneath the passenger area and inboard, rendering them incapable of steering, so the entire contraption was intended to articulate at the mounting point between the engine pod and passenger compartment. Speaking of the passenger compartment, a few issues. One, look at it. The car would be completely unusable in sunny weather. You'd basically be sitting in a solar oven, and the entirely white interior would probably give you snow blindness from how bright everything would be. 2. What happens if you're in a crash? There's no crumple zones or other crash structure. There's no safety. You're just going to be catapulted into the whatever you've been so unfortunate as to hit. 3. Why does it have RAF roundels on the side, since it's an Italian-based car designed by a German chap as a side project? 4. If this was indeed planned as a Le Mans prototype, where does one put all the safety equipment? This kind of comes in from number 2, but where's a roll cage going to go, you know? 5, and this is more food for thought than an actual question, what was the intended purpose of this publicity photo? The car is so futuristic it scares lawn furniture into falling over. Children run from it in such terror that they didn't pay attention and ran into the lawn furniture, knocking it over. I don't know. It's all very odd. Oh well, this isn't turning into a 5-minute guide so much as a 5-minute critique. Still, fortunately, this thing was a one-off, and no more Miuras were harmed in the making of more of these things. It never ran at Le Mans, unsurprisingly, but did spend a few years making the rounds as a concept at international car shows before disappearing in the US in the late 1970s. It then turned up on eBay in 2010, I believe in Ontario, selling for $75,000 despite missing the Lamborghini engine, any front suspension, the windscreen, and being in generally poor condition. Weird world we live in. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and that you'll join us again tomorrow for Oddity Week video number 3.